G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now today, as always, what do we have? We have a lot to look at. Of course, we're going to look over the maps. We're going to go from multiple different sources, but also today I'm going to show you how much ground has moved over this month, as well as some geolocated footage and what vehicles are being used in what areas and what this then tells us. We're going to talk about desertion out of the Ukrainian armed forces and out of the Russian armed forces and see how much of an issue this is becoming. I want to talk about Iskander missiles and that kill chain increase that we have seen and the more successful use of those. And then we need to talk about some strikes as well as a Russian pilot who has been killed by Ukraine's military intelligence, or at least they're the ones that posted it up on their Telegram. Legends, who we are is because of who came before us. But how much do we really know about our history and our relatives? What photographs or records have been lost to time? And what of these records do we never actually know existed in the first place? Well, over the past week, I've been finding out more about my family than I ever have before, with today's video sponsor, MyHeritage. And MyHeritage has helped me and my family rediscover history and photos that we thought was lost, and a lot of this that we never knew actually existed. And I loved sharing this with my relatives, and it was actually really special sharing some of these images with some of my older relatives of people that they hadn't seen a photograph of in years. With MyHeritage, it is super simple to start building your family tree. All that you have to do is put in a few details of your close relatives, and then it starts giving you more and more information of those who then came before you. Now, straight away, you'll get some, but then as time goes on, you'll get more and more. As MyHeritage finds more and more people that are related to you, it'll start giving you more images and more documents. For example, if we just click on one of these brown tiles here, what we can see is that there are records. Now, Francis, we can see that he, in my family, was the one who actually came across to Australia. So in 1824, he was born in Scotland, but then died in Victoria, Australia. And through your family tree and through the My Discoveries feature, you can find new discoveries basically every day, for me at least at the moment. As well with these discoveries, you get a lot of documentation, but you also get what I love are all the photographs of those who, majority of these people I've never met or seen in my life, and this is really special. And you can bring these to life. All you need to do is click on the image, and this is the original, and then using then the MyHeritage tools, you can then colorize the photograph, or you can then click animate and bring this to life like I have met this gentleman before. And even after you've done this initial process, you can continue discovering with MyHeritage's instant discovery feature, and you can search through over 20 billion records. So start building your family tree and discovering who came before you. Sign up using my link below and start using all of the amazing features that MyHeritage has to offer on a 14-day free trial. Thank you, MyHeritage, for bringing me some photographs and documents that I never knew existed, and thank you for sponsoring this video. So look, legends, where I want to start is I actually want to start with the maps, and I do have some footage to show you as well as some figures. Now, what I show you at the start of every month, but sometimes through the month, is we look at how much ground is changing. And what this gives us an idea of is how quickly the front line moving, or is this linear? Is it exponential? How does this look? Now, we don't have a war mapper update, but what we can see from June, but we can see there is an exponential increase in ground that Russia is getting over the front line. So anyone who says, well, it's going to take X amount of years to reach here is just putting in calculations of a linear trajectory. We see this all the time with people going, if you lose this many tanks or this many planes, therefore by X date you will run out. And we have seen those dates come and go. But up to October the 22nd, Deep State says that Russia have increased their control 206 square kilometers. So you can see a little bit less than September. That said, as you're going to see on the maps today, Deep State, I believe, is a fair way behind other maps. Now we can go from more of a Russian source here. We can have a look at, as you can see, translate from Russian, and the SVO being Special Military Operation. We can talk about territorial changes. Now this isn't the month, but what they're talking about is in both Ukraine and in Kursk from just October 17th to 19th. So just within Ukraine's borders of occupied territory, they are saying that it's plus to the Russians 131 square kilometres in that few days at 43.7 kilometres squared a day. And in Kursk, talking 73 or 24 square kilometres a day. It'd be interesting to see if they give a October overall view at the end of the month too, to compare that to the Ukrainian deep state figures and to then the somewhat neutral war mapper figures to try and get an idea of what is changing, as of course there are significant differences between where areas are claimed or not between maps. But where I want to talk about in this is Kursk. But of course here we have Ukraine, the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. So, the green and blue within Ukraine's borders, area that Ukraine has got back in the last 24 hours, and the blue, last 2 weeks or over 2 weeks, and the blue in Kursk, area that Ukraine is occupying within Russia. But it doesn't show where the border at one point was. We know a fair bit of territory here that Ukraine was occupying has been lost over the past few weeks. Now, what we can see on this map, if we zoom in, is this. The one I can't pronounce, Novoivanovka. This front line right here, where we have seen other maps say that Russia is into here or that they have then taken back this area. Now, this is a geolocation I want to show you. So in the grey zone, just where this red dot is that I've put in, this is where we then saw a M1 Abrams and a Bradley conducting an attack on Russian forces. Now, this is from the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade. So we can see the tank, and this is the Bradley in here, and then further on we see the firing, and then of course we see the M1 Abrams tank in action. These two were built to work together. The Bradley has had far more success than the Abrams has had for the Ukrainian forces. But this tells us a couple of very interesting things. We know especially the Abrams, Ukraine has in very small numbers, and these vehicles go to the more elite brigades. So we can see that Ukraine has deployed these guys in here really to hold Kursk. There has been some questions about how badly does Ukraine really want to hold these areas in Kursk, as it looks like it is jeopardizing other areas down in the south and the east that have been then falling at an exponentially increased rate. But we can see by the deployment of these vehicles, potentially better trained guys, better vehicles, and rarer vehicles in less numbers, that they are really keen to hold this or take back some areas. I've been seeing across some Russian maps saying this, that the reason why these guys got deployed in here, into this area, is because there was a risk of a large amount of Ukrainian forces being cut off, that they needed to take back some of this area in here by deploying more high-end brigades, because if the Russians were able to push further in these directions, there could be a large amount of Ukrainian forces cut off in Kursk. So some are claiming this was a bit of a rescue mission, others claiming this was just another attack. But it's interesting to see, the involvement of those vehicles. We know a lot of the full-time volunteers who originally went into Kursk have been replaced by more conscript units, and of course we've seen that change then in the amount of ground that Russia has been able to return in this front. But otherwise, I don't have another map update for you in here today. But then where I want to come down Pokrovsk front and show you a few things. You will see red on this map, but we will get to it, I promise. I was talking, there's a large difference between some areas on Deep State and some areas that maybe that Crimea Caprice will show where the geolocations are, as well as other maps. So this is why I want to have multiple, it'd be great if we had 5 different sources of the square kilometers and average them out. But I want to show you some footage in here of a Russian flag going up and where some troops are. So we have Zerone in here. So where we can see is right where I've drawn this, there's these 3 buildings. So right in where my cursor is. Let's try and give you a measurement. So look, it's close enough to here, say about 1.5 k's, about a mile back, at least from the closest area. But this is where we see the Russian forces fly a Russian flag. We can see the zoom in on this area down to Zorone as well of where these guys were moving across. We see targeting also, but then in this area where I showed you those then 3 buildings, we get this footage here of these Russian soldiers here, then hoisting, sticking in the ground like a bloody astronaut, maybe cosmonaut on this case, then a Russian flag. To not that much success on the hard pack there, maybe some success in the end, but we can see a Russian flag there outside of even the grey zone on this. So potentially contested, likely it is then red zone. So about a mile increase that is possible in here, and others are saying this salient has closed up a lot. Now, of course, we saw that about 3 days ago. Suryak Maps, he talks about this. So where we can see is where Zorani is. So this is a bit hard to see, but see where the waterway runs up. This is the waterway and the reservoir. So he's showing that the majority of Zorani has come under Russian occupation, as well as these 3 paddocks sitting in here by this flag. 48 hours, Russian army took full control over the locality after crossing the Volta River from the northern shore of this reservoir. This reservoir is creating a problem for the Ukrainian forces, as it is a natural border that the Russians can push you and squeeze you out against. We have seen these reservoirs used before, particularly these 2 up in here, hoping to create a cut off in here, a squeeze, but it can work the exact opposite also. So we have a little bit more to show you in here, but while we're here, we'll talk about the Maximalivka Hostre front. We can see the Russian forces moving up to here. Now, this isn't a recent update. We believe it's yesterday. We did see Russian forces working and a flag go up right about where my cursor is yesterday. It will be interesting to see if there are any forces, Ukrainian forces, in this frontline area here, or very soon we'll probably see all of this turn red. What I showed you yesterday was Ukrainian sources, Noel reports, showed this area all in here as red yesterday, even more than the Suryak map did as well. Now, do I have one more in here? Yes, I do. We have another update from Suryak Maps in this front. Again, you can see to the north of Zorone that he's saying that the Russians had a large push through here up to the outskirts of this red dot. Red dot is Hernik. I wish Suryak Maps did a monthly roundup of kilometers squared so we could compare this. So all the way down through where this red dot here is Zorone. So all through here, right down to this reservoir. So a lot of ground he's saying there, as well as this push out where we did see that geolocation yesterday, but this still not coming under red, as we have seen claimed from Ukrainian sources as well. Sees the entire outskirts of Hernik in here. Again, we will wait and see exactly when we have large claims of this extent. Now, we have then Seladov, of course, just to the north of here. Now, of course, there's different claims. Suryak is saying yesterday that the Russian forces are in Vishneve in here. I haven't seen any geolocations of this, but again, wait and see. We did see a Russian motorcycle all the way up into Seladove about 2 weeks ago, so it definitely is contested per se. But we can see this to the bottom of then the Spoilva mine here that the Russian forces have moved up into the outskirts of Zorone, and of course, taking the last supply line to fire control and entering the northern dashes on the north. So this is the northern flank. This is where the Russian forces are up to, he is saying, and taking the last supply line under control. So what Suryak is showing, he's showing that up to here, where the Russians are at the moment, so this has been cut, and then this up here has been cut. But what he's also showing by this one today is he's showing that about to where this dips out, we can then see that there is some level as well that this has been cut, but this right here is then under fire control. So if he's correct in what he's saying, there's only a small gap out through the middle here that is possible to exit. If this is under fire control, we're talking somewhere in the vicinity of 2 kilometers. We have spoken. The Seladove itself is very defensible, but the hardest parts of Seladove are of course, the flanks. And this is looking to becoming a large issue at the moment on the front line. And then I have a geolocation for you. So we see where the grain zone is sitting, where this mine is sitting, and just underneath, I've got a red dot just about where my cursor is. Exact meterage doesn't really matter for this case. In here, what we see then from this footage, where the geolocation comes from, is where then you can see the red R bands, where Russian forces are working. And see these guys jumping up into a blown out, destroyed building here. Now, one thing I take away from this footage is these guys do appear to have some better kit on them and some higher fitness. So could be a recon force, maybe a special operations team, but definitely there's presence of Russians inside of Seladov itself. Yes, maybe in the outskirt blocks, but once you're in the blocks, then we can see that there is going to be large urban battles occurring in here if we don't see a withdrawal. This is the last major area before we may see more of a push onto Pokrovsk. But the risk of losing Pokrovsk is very likely keeping a lot of forces in here, maybe not reinforcing Seladov. Now, one thing while I'm here, which I've just remembered, this mine right here, I don't know the name of it. I don't have it on me. This mine is apparently unbelievably critical to the steel industry and Ukraine's economy, and Russia will try and potentially push for this. We're talking some 20 Ks behind the line, so probably within fab distance, apparently still running, but we will see. I think next thing we will see is TOS 1s landing in Seladov. I think that is likely, but maybe wait out on that for now. So just north of here out to Lysivkia, deep state Ukraine map is showing that Russians have had an advancement in the direction of Lysivkia. This front has been a little bit forwards and backwards over the last few weeks. Now, where do we want to then move? Let's come actually just down to the south further, and we have Katerivka and Antonivka, and we can see a fairly large Russian advance out from Vodiane. Of course, this is the Vuhledar-Vodiane front, where that front has then pushed past, creating that buffer zone. And of course, this front line held for a number of years and a number of months. So let's look at what changes are occurring down in here and where this is then confirmed. So what we can see, so he's showing that there is some changes in here, but he's showing this is Konstantinivka and Katerivka, that he's showing then this area has come under red up to Konstantinivka, but showing significantly less than deep state itself is showing, but he's showing that there is some Russian movement here. But then we come up to the Syriac maps. Now, Antonivka, all the way down to then this red dot is Vodiane. What we can see is both maps are confirming there was some level of large advancement in here. To be honest, actually showing fairly similar. The significant difference is that Syriac map shows up to where this water reservoir is running and maybe a bit out to the west, and does show some further straight west of Vodiane, just in this direction, in these tree lines as well, saying that took control over 40% of Katerivka, so 40% of this area right here. Again, weighed out on that, but we have seen definitely some advancements in this direction. Now, let's just move back up north a little bit. I forgot to show you one thing. In Tushkerne, right in here, that the Russian forces are saying that they are releasing some propaganda as a bit of a laugh. Now, I can't say if this is a doctored image or not, but they are saying that the North Koreans aren't working here. They've said they've put up as a piss take because of all the media that they have then flown a North Korean flag here. Now, of course, you can see where the one side of propaganda has said, look, there's North Koreans already fighting this and that. Of course, one side is already saying that North Koreans are deserting and are being killed. But the same side is also saying that they may enter the battle in a couple of weeks or months, which doesn't really make sense. And the Russians are saying that they're playing into that, going, they're not even going to deploy here. You're using that as a way to try and get more support. So we flew a flag as a piss take. That's the two sides that I'm seeing speaking about this. So let's just push up north a little bit further, and we can see a Russian advancement to the west, northwest of New York. So what we can see today, Syriac maps. Now, these do show significantly different to the direct north. Regardless, let's talk about the west of this red dot, which is New York. Here's showing that there was further Russian advancement. These two actually lining up fairly closely on that western side. Now, that is all of the red we then see on this map today confirmed, but we do have a couple of other claims. So yesterday we did see out near Veshnevy that there was a Russian advance here of a couple of kilometers. This is getting confirmed by Surak maps today by this movement just here. What I did say was this movement in line with the Pishani movement and where the Oskil runs the natural border, this is a real concern now that the Russians have reached and cut off the Oskil. Supply of areas up here is going to be very difficult, and we may see a further push. No changes shown on this map today, but let's have a look up here. This is the front we're looking at right in here. It is showing that the Russians see where this road or the train line might be, pushes out here. This is right on that corner. So saying basically straight across from here, that's where the Russians have pushed over the last 24 hours, trying to expand that bridgehead and split a north and south group and supply. Now, we have pushed down just a little bit further than we have Nevsky in here, where we have seen advances over the past few weeks. Now, just to the south of here, Noel reports is showing that the Russian forces have gained some control in here too. If we take where this tree line splits into a Y, basically running straight down from here. So a little bit different control. Remember, Surak is shown between Makivka and Nevsky is basically filled in, same as Nevsky all the way down to near Terny is getting more filled in. And this is the area we need to speak about next is this Terny and this Zarachny front by our last Surak map update in here. So see this red dot? This is this Zarachny Torsk front. So if we zoom in, we get Torsky, in here. Regardless what we're going to be looking at, you see where this road then does the right angle, that he's saying the Russian forces are pushing through this paddock where my cursor is, right up to here. But the Ukrainian forces were able to, managed to expel Russian forces from the farms taken yesterday. So where some of the Russians got some areas that they've been able to be pushed back. Also seen by this blue arrow here, trying to get to here to create another natural border as well. Just to the north, we have these three prongs, just this area in here getting filled in. Again, the area I showed you in here is the same area that Noel reports is showing changes, so we can confirm that front definitely had some shifting. Now, let's talk about Iskanders, and I found this very interesting from C. Flattery. Now, I'm trying to get him on a podcast, but shortening the observation, orientation, decision, and action loop in 2024 drone warfare is a human factors question. For instance, it is generally understood that at least one new unmanned aviation brigade is likely dedicated to using all-land 30 UAVs to coordinate strikes with Iskander missile troops. Now, one thing we have seen is Russia not only has increased the amount of Iskander strikes that are successful, we've got a video of that, it has appeared that they are far faster on target, are saying there may have been some policy change around kill chain. We do know that some of those missile brigades came then under artillery to use those systems of the artillery UAV and command to put strikes on target, and has seemed to work very well for the Russian force. We've seen an increase of those Iskanders, as well as it does look like they are producing potentially more of them or willing to use more of them. Expensive system. We've even seen them wasted on things like decoys, on real systems, but there seems to be no shortage of these, and increased ability for Ukrainian air defense to actually hit them. The Russian all-land Iskander pairing relies on dedicated staff officer acting directly as an interface between the two units. So this is what has been increased. This has overcome critical delays in gathering and disseminating target information vertically through cumbersome command structures. This works primarily as a horizontal linkage. Again, your traditional way of superiority can run into problems. He points out perfectly how the Australian forces actually have changed this. A horizontal linkage directly interacts with another unit's observation, orientation, decision, and action, shortening the decision cycle. By acting across respective command structures, which are largely vertical hierarchical entities, the classical command and control structure, the new structure starts to resemble command influence. See, I model the role of command influence in the Australian multidimensional manoeuvre theory. This is very interesting to see. So to change that from a vertical way of hierarchy into the level of importance on the ground. Armies do have a significant amount of these. I'll show you what this actually is for the Aussies. But for instance, the most simple way I can talk about this is I myself was a combat first aider and then trained in AMTT, Advanced Medical Trauma Training. So although at the time of that I may have held the rank of a private, I was more trained in medical than potentially the sergeant or the lieutenant or the captain or the major. So if we had a medical situation go down, regardless of rank, for that, just the small level, like of the security and this and that, yeah, of course they're going to be in charge. But right here and now, what is happening here is I actually have the hierarchy there of what to do for, say, X patient. You see this with people that are subject matter experts in one area, may not hold the rank, but in the traditional vertical structure, there's a lot of problems, but you have a more horizontal structure that it's based off their knowledge and skill. You'll get this. So, command and control influence in the Australian multidimensional manoeuvre theory. Command and control capabilities will provide effective decision making at all levels to synchronise assigned forces with a multidimensional campaign. This will involve balancing hierarchical command structures with a decentralised and concurrent actions in joint, combined and coalition structures. So what is happening right at the time. Using examples drawn from the Australian Army, land warfare, I will argue that in addition to C2 elements and effective command, the notion of influence can be identified as an enabler of multi-dimensional influence. Influence is definable by the effect of one person's or another influence has been controlling a forcible aspect as well as guiding or persuasive element. So again, it can be based off that person's level of influence on situation, not exactly the rank. And that is what he's saying the Russians have done to speed up that OODA of the Iskanders on target. Multidimensional maneuver typically involves forces moving at speed. These forces may fall out effective communications and control of superior commanders. Superior commanders can utilize influence as a mean to maintain force cohesion and command direction. Circumstances where this may occur theoretically are information operations IO and reach technical limits. So it can involve the speed, and if you fall out of comms from the commanders, who then comes under control and influence and all of this and that break down. Based on the maneuverist approach, which is already present in our current warfighting doctrine, this approach seeks to apply strength against weakness. It values surprise and deception. It requires the ability to act fast, to reach out the critical place at the right time and create simultaneous problems that an adversary cannot resolve. So this is one thing we've seen with the Iskander. Now, there is some question about if the Iskanders can or cannot be laser guided. Let's say that they are the same Iskander that entered the war at the start and the same Orlan that entered the war at the start. We have seen an increase of those being used. So then it is somewhere in the policy. We've seen the kill chain. I believe in the start that these Orlans were looking at something going, we need to put a bomb on this, but that vertical, super strict hierarchical structure and superiority, then couldn't actually just get that on target before it had moved or would just never arrive. So it looks like that is what has changed, and that is objectively true. The Iskanders are having more effect. Now, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has arrived in Kyiv. Of course, we will see probably more aid packages delivered, but of course, the main talking point there is going to be to attempt to try and get US support for the victory plan. Now, let's talk about a couple of things. Let's talk about bombers a little bit. So AMK mapping. Recent Russian aviation movements and radio transmission suggest that there will be a large-scale missile attack on Ukraine in the next 9 hours involving Tu-95S bombers, which carrying these cruise missiles. Now, again, I don't know if this is happening right now. I'm talking to you, but potentially there will be. But either way, he says the missile strike in KH-101s have not been used for 48 days. What I believe the Russians are doing here is that they are building some level of stocks, maybe to use or to backfill reserve, and that is going to be one huge blow against the electricity system. Can that system be taken fully out? That is questionable and may not be possible the way that some of those Soviet systems were built. We've heard this spoken about. Can they degrade it further? Absolutely. Can they take out bits that were damaged and then fixed? Yes, as well. So this is going to come near to elections, the US elections, and closer to, well, I've written Whitner here, but close to winter. I think they'll save up and try and take it out there, will not take it out completely, but degrade it further, heading into winter, heading into elections, to try and maybe put Russia looking to be in a better strategic point by making Ukraine in looking at a worse strategic point on that electricity, and that of course affects psychological morale with heating and all of this too. So I reckon we will see at some point a very large missile attack. But speaking of bombers, the Ukrainian military intelligence, the GUR, of course the Russians have the GRU, both come out of the Soviet GRU that existed. Of course, when that split then occurred, that's why they're named similarly. But let's have a look at this. The hammer of justice. The war criminal Dmitry Golenkov was eliminated in Russia. The corpse of war criminal Golenkov was found in an apple orchard in the village of Sopanovo near Bryansk in Russia. He was the pilot of the 52nd Heavy Bomber, and of course these fly Tu-22 Mike 3 bombers. Found in an orchard, the war criminal held the post of the Chief of Staff of the Russian Aviation Squadron, involved in rocket attacks on civilian infrastructure, in particular the shopping centre in Kremenchuk, Poltava. Time of the attack, there were 1,000 people in the shopping centre. As a result of the war crime, 22 people died and dozens were injured. This is one thing I have questioned with those attacks and the destruction there. With 1,000 were there and 22 injured, or 22 died. That is questionable on how many were there or what the specific targeting was. But there are all questions raised about this. But I'm not. It's irregardless. Golonkov is also responsible for a rocket attack on a residential building in Dnipro when 46 Ukrainian civilians died, including 6 children. Multiple head injuries, probably caused by a hammer. The GUR, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, reminds that there will be fair retribution for every war crime. So saying these are war crimes that he has committed and there will be fair retribution to this. And I've seen this both celebrated and people calling out this itself as a war crime. And I initially was like, well, look, he committed these, fired these rockets, this and that, regardless how you see the action, absolutely was a combatant in this war at some point flying one of these. So I thought, look, I'm seeing a lot of people pulling out that this is still against laws of armed conflict. So I myself thought the easiest way for me to do this quickly is actually just go on ChatGPT and ask without trying to give any biases in this, and I'll show you what it said. Would it be a breach of laws of armed conflict to send an assassin or recruit an internal assassin in a country you're at war with to kill a bomber pilot with a hammer? This is what a lot of people are saying. They're saying, okay, regardless of what he did, he was not a combatant at the time, or this could violate things. And that didn't sound right to me, but I'll show you this and you can agree or disagree as you want. But yes, targeting a bomber pilot in this manner could potentially violate several principles of laws of armed conflict, LOAC, or International Humanitarian Law, the IHL, depending on how the operation was conducted. Here are the key considerations. Distinction, which requires combatants to distinguish between military objectives like bomber pilots and civilians. A bomber pilot is actively engaged in warfare is a lawful military target. However, the means and methods used to target the individual must adhere to legal principles. Means and methods of warfare. LOAC prohibits methods of warfare that cause unnecessary suffering or superfluous injury. Using a hammer to kill a bomber pilot could be seen as unnecessary, brutal, or inhumane attack, which may violate these articles here of the Geneva Convention, particularly if there are other more humane ways to carry out the objective. This is where you'll hear about that 50 cals are not allowed to be technically put as an AMR, an anti-material rifle, not as an anti-personnel. Perfect. Recruiting and setting assassin may be considered perfidious under LOAC, especially if the person is using deceit or distinguish their intentions, such as pretending to be a civilian or non-combatant to get close to the targeted killings. While targeted killings of combatants are not necessarily unlawful during armed conflict, the methods must be consistent with LOAC. Assassins carried out in a manner that does not respect the principles of necessity, distinction, proportionality, and humanity would violate humanitarian law. In summary, while killing a bomber pilot who is an active combatant is not inherently unlawful, the use of an assassin with a hammer may violate some of these, particularly regarding the method of attack and the rules against perfidy and unnecessary suffering. So I wanted to break this down just a little bit further to educate myself somewhat on this too. And again, this is still an AI, so be careful with any of this. But what for a pilot then constitutes being actively involved in warfare? Is that at all times? Is it when you're in the plane? What is this? But when they're conducting combat missions, of course, shoot them down. Preparing for combat missions, preparing to take off, of course, and returning from a mission, and in maintenance and support roles. But what does not constitute active involvement? Rest or leave or non-operational duties. A pilot who is performing a purely administrative or non-combative combat-related tasks away from the battlefield may not be considered actively involved in warfare, depending on the context. So some saying out picking apples. Now, will this have any effect on anything? No, it's not going to. Everyone's thrown the rule book out the window with drones. Any idea of laws of armed conflict, once drones enter the battlefield, it is fucking gone. Throw it out of a window like a propagandist in Russia. Especially now that what we've seen then in the Middle East at the moment, well, trust me, you're trying to break down proportionality or use of something, and you're seeing the use of exploding radios that absolutely could just be in anyone's hand at the time. Well, look, good luck trying to add any of this onto anyone. But I think this is still an interesting part to break down. For the above scenario, do you think it's a breach? In the scenario you've described, sending an assassin to kill a bomber pilot with a hammer, it seems highly likely to be a breach of LOAC for several reasons. Even if the pilot were actively involved in warfare, which we know he was. The method of killing, that could violate the principle of unnecessary suffering or superfluous injury. While the bomb part is a legitimate target during active hostilities, there are expectations combatants will be killed in a way that does not cause excessive pain or suffering. Perfidy, if the assassin was recruited under false pretenses or pretends to be a civilian or neutral party to approach the part, this could be considered perfidy. Remember, perfidy involves betraying the enemy's trust or foreign non-combatant status to kill, injure, capture, which is illegal. One of the things I think Russia will go after later on in the war because of how powerful it is, I think that we may see Russia really lean on the UN. I don't know if they'll do anything, but about actually the killing of Dugin's daughter. Alexander Dugin, of course, some will say he's the most dangerous philosopher in the world, but regardless, he's not a combatant in this, nor is he official. There is some question about how much influence he actually has, rather than just being an author, and how much there actually is between Putin. But of course, that bomb that CIA said was Ukraine killed his daughter. I'll be interested to see what happens down the line from if there'll be any of that. Targeting the pilot outside active combat. If the pilot was not actively engaged in combat mission, they're on leave, resting, not preparing for a mission at the time of the assassination, they are not a lawful target. Killing the pilot when they're not actively involved in warfare would violate the principle of distinction, which requires distinguishing between lawful military targets and those who are not currently engaged in front lines. So the conclusion is it likely violates multiple provisions from the status, the time of the killing, and determine whether it is a breach. They need to be looking into more of this. But from what I described, which is very little, it appears to be likely unlawful. But like I said, in this, we hear about people being brought to justice. I think is highly unlikely, just because I think drones, it's not drones that need to change, it's us who needs to change. The amount of war crimes committed with drones every single day by fucking everyone is absurd. And that is just what is then filmed and uploaded. I'd hate to know behind. And we see Russians shooting Russians, Russians shooting Ukrainians, Ukrainians shooting Russians. And of course, it's a war. There are things that are completely illegal. I was a combat soldier back in the day. But in this, it's disgusting to me how many blatant war crimes we see, from where missiles hit through to even shooting our own at some point, which we have seen, through to the execution of POWs, through the use of drones, and people saying that this isn't a war crime when it is. The use of gas grenades, which we see is systemic as well for both Russia and Ukraine by what we see as well. K-51s, yes, it's a riot control, yes, it's chloropicrine, but we do know that is definitely being used, and I'll never stand for anything. I think regardless of the uniform, patch, language, whatever, the laws of armed conflict need to be upheld at all levels. It is incredibly important, and if we don't, well, we can't expect at any point in the future, if the West step into a war for our enemy at that point in time, regardless of who it is, to uphold that either, if we can't uphold it internally also. Although I don't have high hopes for that with actions happening all around the world. We know Russia's not going to uphold it. We know the US is very likely not going to uphold it from a lot of evidence. Anyway, I had another part on desertion. This video is getting too long, but I'll speak about that tomorrow. So seeing into the future, but you can also look into the past. And in the beginning of this video, I said the sponsor is MyHeritage. I really enjoyed using MyHeritage as a way to look back at my family history and discover so much that I had never actually known. So click the link in my description and you can sign up for a free 14-day trial to use MyHeritage. And thank you, MyHeritage, for sponsoring this video.